So as I've talked about multiple times over the past few weeks on this podcast, this upcoming Saturday is finally going to be the weekend. That absolutely massive UFC card, this time coming from the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. 3 championship fights on the card. Just an absolute, at this point, just almost like a WrestleMania of MMA. We tend to see these maybe once or twice a year. I mean, and they're always exciting. But I do have to cop to something. I mean, I've actually been doing something that really everybody else has been doing, and that is that leading up to this fight, I've been talking about Israel Adesanya an awful lot. And there's good reason for that. You know, the stakes for Israel Adesanya are very high. He's doing something that a lot of champions don't do while they are the champion. In this case, in trying to move up a division and trying to take another champion's belt off of him. I mean, he's already got a belt. He doesn't need to do something like that. You know, and it's obviously very exciting to see somebody who is not risk averse as the champion. You know, I mean, not, in comparison to somebody such as, say, Kamaru Usman. I mean, Kamaru Usman, there's a champion who is blatantly playing it safe. Israel Adesanya is not, and that's very exciting, and so that garners a lot of attention. But you know, I am guilty of something, as guilty as almost everybody else who is talking about this event is guilty of, and that is just simply the fact is that, you know, the champion really is not getting his respect. You know, the champion, he's not getting his story told. Everybody is so focused on Adesanya that Jan Blachowicz is almost being entirely overlooked. Now, Uncle Chael Sonnen, he has pointed out that that is, in some respect, that is Jan Blachowicz's fault. You know, it is up to him and his team to make sure that his story gets told, to make sure that he becomes a part of this narrative. And you know, really, they're not getting that in particular done. And I think that's a shame because a lot of people are going to go into this fight thinking that Jan Blachowicz is just any other fighter that a guy like Adesanya is going to come across and blow past. And the truth of the matter is that is very much not the case for Jan Blachowicz. There's actually quite a few similarities in this particular fight, as there were to Gilbert Burns in that last fight against Kamaru Usman. And so, as I mentioned in that lead up to the last fight with Kamaru Usman, Gilbert Burns, you know, he was in that situation where he was carrying the weight of his country on his shoulders. For Gilbert Burns, the reason why he was doing that was because there has never been, you know, the UFC has never had a welterweight champion of the world from the country of Brazil. In the one country in the world where MMA is arguably bigger than any other sport, arguably bigger than any other country in the world, pardon me. And that country hasn't had a welterweight champion of the world. That's very remarkable. And Poland is actually pretty similar to Brazil in one particular respect, and that is that MMA is an absolutely massive sport in Poland. And they've waited quite a long time to actually have a world champion from Poland. I mean, exactly how big a sport in Poland is MMA? In Poland, MMA is, it's been described as MMA is in Poland what hockey is in Canada. And so to be the only world champion walking the face of the earth right now from your home country, knowing that the sport is so big there, Jan Blachowicz has got to be feeling a ton of pressure. And meanwhile, everybody's looking at Israel Adesanya as a guy who's just going to walk into the UFC Apex and just take that belt off of him. I think a lot of people actually are of the opinion that even despite the fact that Israel Adesanya is having to move up a weight class, having to fight somebody with not only more power than anybody that he's ever fought at middleweight, but somebody who's going to be tougher and harder to put down than anybody else that he's ever fought at middleweight. But even then, there are a lot of people who are just looking at this like, you know what, Adesanya, he's got this in the bag. Blachowicz is just going to be a footnote in MMA history, to Israel Adesanya's rise to being the greatest of all time. Now, there's absolutely no way that Jan Blachowicz could not be aware of what the expectations surrounding this fight are. He has to know that. And honestly, much to his credit to the kind of character he is, having seen a lot of these interviews and things that he's done leading up to this fight, I don't personally see a whole lot of evidence there of a champion who is, he has to be cognizant of the detail that he's being disrespected, but he doesn't really seem like he's embittered that he's being disrespected. He doesn't seem like he's going to be walking into this fight with a chip on his shoulder, which in all honesty I think is probably going to be a very large impediment to Israel Adesanya being able to carry out the kind of game plan that seems to be agreed upon that he's going to need in order to win this fight. And as I've heard it now from several sources, it seems like the game plan that Adesanya needs to go into this fight with is that he needs to keep his distance from Blachowicz. He needs to stop Blachowicz from getting into the pocket, getting in close, and being able to bury him with a lot of those round punches that Blachowicz uses so effectively. He needs to try to keep this fight at range, pick Blachowicz away slowly, and hope that Blachowicz makes a mistake. As a matter of fact, as Chael Sonnen kind of made it clear, in his opinion, in Uncle Chael's opinion, the most reliable tactic that Israel Adesanya is going to be able to put at his disposal going into a fight like this is trying to provoke Blachowicz into making a mistake. It doesn't seem like Blachowicz is of a mind that he's going to help Adesanya do that. Now, once those two guys get into that cage, that could change in a heartbeat. Everything can change very, very quickly once you get into that UFC octagon. But Blachowicz is not going to show up to this fight frustrated. I think that is plainly obvious. He is not going to show up frustrated. Israel Adesanya is going to have to find a way to frustrate him. And personally, I doubt that that's going to be easy. I think at this point we do have to take a moment to kind of understand exactly how different the tasks in front of each of these fighters is. Each of these fighters, they are walking into this cage and they're going to face a very different task once they get in there. Israel Adesanya's task is that he has to go in there and he's going to have to pick Jan Blachowicz apart. He's going to have to try to utilize his mobility, stay away from Blachowicz, try to pick him apart, break him down with smaller shots. He's probably not going to be going in there trying to close distance and swing with all of his power. He has to find whole bunch of little punches over the course of 25 minutes. And that doesn't seem especially daunting. 25 minutes is quite a bit of time for a guy like Adesanya to work with, especially when you consider the fact that he's likely to walk into that fight as the smaller, lighter, faster of the two. But smaller, lighter, faster, all of that together is one thing, but that means that you have to look at two things here in particular. Smaller and lighter. Well, basically what that means is that Israel Adesanya is going to be vulnerable to the power shots. If Blachowicz can get him into a place, where he can really utilize what we expect to be his superior power, Adesanya is going to be very vulnerable to that. So Adesanya is going in and he's looking for a lot of smaller, lighter punches. Jan Blachowicz, he's looking for one punch. As Chael Sonnen said very recently, he's looking for one punch, and he's got 25 minutes to find it. Now, Israel Adesanya, he's seen that before. As a matter of fact, as Robin Black had it, that was basically what Paulo Costa was looking for against Israel Adesanya. As he was looking to close in, one punch, utilize what everybody was expecting to be his superior power. Paulo Costa, depending on who you ask, if you ask Paulo Costa, he showed up to that fight already having given himself a huge disadvantage. Recently, he said that he showed up to that fight drunk, which if you're a professional fighter, to actually suggest that you showed up to a world championship fight, showing up, trying to become the middleweight champion of the world, and you show up drunk, that's a really bad luck. That's a pretty good way to guarantee that you will. It should be a way to guarantee that you will never get another opportunity like that again. I can't even think of a reason why they should even continue to license a fighter who shows up drunk. But you know what? It's me getting off on a bit of a tangent there. Let's bring this back. So according to Robin Black, the strategy that Paulo Costa was supposed to use was that he was just supposed to try to walk Adesanya down. So according to Robin Black, the strategy that Costa was supposed to employ against Adesanya was simply this. He was supposed to just try to walk Izzy down, corner him, and then bury him with what everybody expected was going to be superior power. I mean, Paulo Costa's previous experience to MMA, his background, his formative background is actually in bodybuilding. You should expect that he should have a lot of power there. But that didn't work out for him. Because not only did he fight that fight stupidly, but Adesanya was just too mobile and Costa couldn't corner him. Especially in that bigger cage that they had on Fight Island. And so let's work another factor into this analysis. This isn't Fight Island. This is going to be at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. They're fighting in that smaller octagon. That means that there's going to be an awful lot less space there for a fighter who is relying on his mobility. But for a fighter who has always relied on his mobility, there's going to be an awful lot less space there for him to be mobile within. So it wasn't easy for Paulo Costa to corner Israel Adesanya in Fight Island, which is evidenced by the fact that he didn't get it done. It's going to be an awful lot easier for Jan Blachowicz to corner Israel Adesanya at the UFC Apex. Now that's by no means a guarantee that he's going to get it done, because like we mentioned before, Adesanya, he's going to show up at that fight as the lighter, faster fighter. It's not easy to corner. It's not any easier to corner a faster fighter. I mean, it might be easier to do it within a smaller octagon than it would be in the bigger octagon. But he's not going to have an easy time with that. And if Blachowicz shows up, just assuming that he's going to corner Adesanya, I think that he has another thing coming. Now, honestly, I haven't looked at the betting line for this fight. I mean, I can tell you who the favorite is, but I can't tell you by how much they're favored. But in my opinion, it isn't nearly. If the amount of commentary on YouTube is any kind of indication as to what the betting line is, I don't think that's I don't think that's as safe a bet for Adesanya as a lot of people are assuming it is. I think that this fight is much closer to 50-50 than a lot of people are giving it credit for. Now, in keeping with my previous commitment to not try to predict any more MMA fights, I think at this point I have probably gotten about as close with this fight as I can. I mean, I think that I have, I've done some videos now where I'm obviously favoring Adesanya, and I think that maybe this one seems like it favors Blachowicz a little bit more. So going into this fight, I mean, the only thing that we can do now is wait and watch. The eyes of the world are watching. And now, in just a few short days, we are going to find out if we are going to have Israel Adesanya walk out of the UFC Apex on Saturday night as the champ squared, as he would call it, or whether or not we're going to have to reassess entirely what Israel Adesanya's path to potentially being the greatest of all time is going to be. All I can tell you for sure is that I am trying very, very hard to not inadvertently cost any of my friends any more money.